Take a deep breath in and out. And crick.
Crack.
Crick.
Crack.
So once upon a time, there was a young boy, and he was Catholic, and he was in Sunday school one morning, and they read him the part of the Bible where Jesus comes before Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate sits on his throne, and he looks down at Jesus, and Jesus is a prisoner at this point. And he says, Jesus, so they all say that you are the truth. So if that's the case, what is that? What is the truth? Are you the truth? What does that even mean? And Jesus looks back at Pontius Pilate, and he says nothing. He remains silent. And finally, Pontius Pilate sends him off. Now, this kid who heard this story, he was dumbfounded. He couldn't understand it. He was told his whole life that Jesus was the truth, but why didn't he answer Pontius Pilate then? Why didn't he tell Pontius Pilate that he was the truth and what that meant? Well, he couldn't understand, and he asked his Sunday school teacher, and they couldn't give him a good explanation. And as he grew older, this question was always nagging his mind. And he went to high school, and he asked his teachers there, what is the truth? And they couldn't give him a good answer. One said math, one said literature, one said this, one said that. No one could give him a proper answer that met with what he felt in his heart, that he couldn't even put into words. So he went on to college. And you think he got an answer in college? No. Finally, he went on to life, and he got a job, and he had a family, and he just got on with everything. But finally, it came a point where his kids were all grown up, and they were paying for their own lives, and he didn't have to support them anymore. And he thought, this is my chance. Maybe I can finally go off and go on a quest and really find truth, what it means. And he told his wife, he said, honey, I'm going to go on a quest for the truth. Sorry. And she said, oh, that's great. Go have your fun, honey. Just sign the house over to me. Sign the car over to me. Go, go, go. So he signed everything over, and he just packed a small bag, put it over his shoulder, and off he set. And he traveled far and wide. He went to village, to town, to city, and everywhere he went, he said, do you know the truth? Do you? Do you? And one person would say yes, the other person would say no, but even the person who said yes, they would say one thing and then do another thing. And it would always contrast with what other people were saying, and ultimately, it wouldn't resonate with his own heart. And so it was that he crossed mountains, traveled through forests, went over rivers and oceans, and finally, one day, he came to this little dusty city called Tucson in Arizona. And when he got to Tucson, he walked around and he said, so do you guys know the truth? And they said, well, we don't, but there's this woman who lives on the outskirts of town, right on top of one of the mountains. Her name is Dona Verdad, which in Spanish means Lady Truth. They said, she's Lady Truth. She should know the truth. And he said, this was the first possibility he'd sensed in years of travel. So he left the outskirts of Tucson and he came to this little dusty mountain. And there on the bottom was an old wooden sign. And on it was written, Dona Verdad, and a little arrow pointing up. So he said, yeah. And he walked all the way up to the top of this mountain. And when he got there was an old cabin and it was falling to pieces with holes in the ceiling and the roof and holes in the wall. And he walked up looking at it and he knocked on the door. And the door opened with a and standing in the doorway was this old woman. And she had little tufts of white hair and this big nose covered with warts and a couple of boogers hanging out of it. And one of her eyes was all red with all this goop dripping down the side of her nose. And her other eye was kind of squinting. And her mouth was pulled up in the sneer. And she had a couple of teeth missing. And they were all, the ones that were there, they were kind of yellow and greenish color. She was hunched over with this funny position. And she said, yes? And he said, excuse me, are you Dona Verdad? And she said, oh, yes. And he said, well, could I come in? Could you tell me the truth? I've been looking for my whole life. And she said, oh, come in. And she led him into this old ramshackle little cabin, and she sat him down. She gave him some milk and some cookies, and she just started speaking. And his eyes grew wide. His ears opened up. His heart blossomed. Because every word coming from her mouth, it just felt like the truth. The truth with a capital T. It was the most amazing thing. And she just spoke and told stories and said jokes, and everything felt true. And he ended up staying all of that day and into the next day and the next day and the next day. And weeks turned into months as he sat there by the foot of Dona Verdad, just drinking in her words, drinking in her truth. Until finally, a year and a day had passed. And he felt like he'd gotten all the truth he could possibly contain. And now it was time for him to go off back into the world and share the truth that he had learned with everybody else. But before he did, he went up to Dona Verdad and he said, "Lady Truth, not very many people come into this cabin to see you. Really, I've been the only one in a year and a day. And so in addition to the truth, which I'm going to take out and spread to the rest of the world, is there some sort of personal message from you specifically that I can share with everybody?" And Dona Verdad looked up at him with that one bleary eye and the one red one all kind of dripping on the side, and she wiped it and she rubbed it on her shirt, and then she took one of her long curled up uncut fingernails and she used it to pick a booger out of her nose and flicked it behind her. And she looked up at him and she said, "Yes, tell them that I am young and beautiful." Crick.
Crack.